All right. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to our webinar, Reducing Your Cost Per Mile with Automatic and Automated Manual Heavy-Duty Transmissions. I'm Jason Morgan, editor of Fleet Equipment and a speaker in today's event. This webinar is sponsored by the DA Lubricant Company. OEMs are shifting from standard to automatic and automated manual transmissions. It's a trend that's been continuing here for the past couple of years. So during this webinar, we're going to dig into the differences into those transmissions, the benefits, and talk about the fuel economy and annual savings related to all of that. First, let me do some housekeeping with our webinar platform here. Part of this webinar, we'll have a live Q&A session toward the end. We'll answer as many questions as we can during the last portion of the event. Submit your questions as you think about them during the webinar. I'm going to be asking a lot of questions, right? So as you think of your questions, send them in, and we'll make sure that we get to them. Don't wait to the end of the event. You could forget what you wanted to ask, so please send them in as you're thinking about them. To send it in, type your question into the Ask a Question box, then click the Submit button. Additionally, this webinar is being recorded and will be available on demand for you to view later. We encourage you to share it, come back, to review some of the information that we'll go over. You'll receive an email with a link to the on-demand version in a few days. It'll direct you to the Fleet Equipment site where you can watch it again. Looking at your widget bar at the bottom of the console, a bunch of icons down there. It'll open and close windows. When you put your cursor over any of those icons, you'll see the name of the widget to kind of help you along there. There's also social icons, Facebook, things like that, and an icon that lets you send a link of this webinar to a colleague or friend so you can share it there. There's also an option to print a certificate for attending today's webinar if that's something you need. You can access that by clicking on the yellow certificate icon. And if you need help at any point during the webinar, click the question mark icon for some troubleshooting tips. And of course, the standard IT technical issue. If you're having any issues with audio or slides or video, hit the F5 key or refresh the window. That should bring everything back and hopefully fix your problem. So now let's get to the meat of it, right? I'd like to introduce one of our presenters here. We have Jim Salomon joining us today. Jim is the technical manager for DA Lubricant Company and has been with the company for nearly 10 years. He provides sales staff and customer support, lubricant recommendations, product education, parts analysis, troubleshooting, and product cross-referencing. He is also a certified truck engine analysis and certified Caterpillar engine instructor. Jim, welcome. Glad to have you here and dig into some of these transmission details.
Oh, thanks for the introduction, Jason. That made me feel good.
Well, your list of credentials there is impressive. Glad to have you on. We'll just dive right into here to the questions and get started. Let's set a baseline here, right? We all know that the transmission segment in the heavy duty world has changed quite a bit. Can you just maybe talk to us about why OEMs and fleets are shifting away from the standard manual transmission and in the automatics and automated manual transmissions?
Yeah, absolutely. You are correct. We're seeing more demand for less driver interaction, if you will, or better fuel economy that you can get from switch. Well, let's just mention automatic transmissions. You're going to hear us throughout the day here, throughout the hour, talking about automated transmissions primarily, which is the focus of on-highway transmissions for over-the-road trucks. But automatics do have a small part in there, as they are typical, very similar to what you have in your passenger car. In other words, the driver gets in, puts it in gear, and it goes down the road. You don't have to do anything else. It shifts automatically. Now, over-the-road trucking hasn't adopted that technology as much as they have automated. And I'll explain the difference here when we get into a little bit later section. But automatic transmissions are simply automatic shift transmissions where the driver doesn't have any input. To be able to go into a market such as over-the-road trucking, they had to be more durable, better life expectancy, smoother shift patterns, and all that had to be put into play in order for them to be used in that. What we primarily see those in are like transit buses, vocational trucks such as cement mixers, trash trucks, where the driver can just get in and go down the road, doesn't have to worry about it. The over the road, it's a little bit more demanding, so we're not seeing that growth with automatic transmissions. Keep in mind, we're talking automatic, not automated, which I will definitely go into here in a little bit. But of course, the nice thing about those, as you'll see with the automated, is driver interaction is limited, but also behind the scenes, more things can be done with the technicians or the owners electronically. In other words, they can program the shift patterns so that they can be harder or softer depending on the need. Plus speed limits, which a lot of operators don't care for, but owners do. Speed limits can be adjusted where they, no matter what the engine's set at, the transmission won't allow it to go over a certain RPM or a certain speed. And another common thing or really easy thing about the automatic transmissions is they typically use a red fluid, similar to what you used in today's passenger car, which is either a low viscosity or a normal viscosity transmission. So that's kind of it. That's really all I wanted to talk about as far as automatic transmissions go. So we can get into some of the other stuff on the other transmissions now, if you like.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So we got three different ones here we're talking about. We got our standard manual, which we'd all have known. You kind of broke out that the automatic, you do see it more in those vocational applications for sure. But that the automated manual transmissions, right? What we commonly refer to as AMTs on the on-highway, over the road. Those have come along quite a bit. You know, Blades may remember them from even maybe now a decade or so past. That were, you know, their manual transmissions. They had this automated thing, but now they've really grown, to your point, really smooth shift points, intelligent powertrain. Can you help me walk through the differences here? If it's an automated manual or a manual, how do they do this in the technology side of it?
Sure. The manual transmission used in over-the-road trucks is similar in principle to the same thing that your great-grandfather grew up with in his pickup truck, or even in their cars. And it's still available today. You see it primarily in sports cars or some heavy duty trucks. You'll see a manual transmission. Now you'll hear the word standard, which is the same thing. When you hear me say standard or manual, I'm talking about the same thing. There's no difference there. The biggest thing is driver interaction. The driver actually has to manually push in the clutch each time he's starting off, each time they shift, and they have to manually select the appropriate gear to match the road speed. Oftentimes up to 10 to 17 shifts till they get up to the speed that they desire. The transmissions are made up of steel gears. They also have brass bushings or bronze bushings, the softer metals that are in there that are used to guide the shift forks so that the transmissions slide back and forth easily into each other, and the gears will actually mesh up or slide together. The bad thing is there's a lot of moving parts, but the good thing is they're extremely durable. A lot of drivers, the older drivers, like them because they can choose the ratio that they want when they're going up a hill or down a hill. That's primarily the use of it. The limiting factors of those we'll get into a little bit later, but there are some limiting factors. Driver's fatigue obviously is one of them, which we'll talk about later. And, you know, human error, you've got human interaction that can miss a shift, can cause issues. Trying to force it into gear can cause some damage to the gearings. Those are some things like that can be an issue. One of the things that, and by the way, I forgot to put this up. This is a kind of a typical cutaway of an automatic transmission. You can see you really don't have any gears to deal with on that. They're strictly clutches, plates, and not clutches like you think of on a manual transmission, but friction disc is a better term for it, that have to be pushed together through hydraulic pressure to gain the speed or the ratio that you're looking for. And that's all done automatically through rerouting fluid to different chambers that energize those. So this is a picture of the manual transmission that we're talking about now. You can see the shift lever on there. Typically there is a button on the lever that allows them to change ratios from high to low and go through a different set of gears. to change those ratios. And again, that slid back and forth. One of the things that needs to be considered when you're dealing with what fluids to use is typically these kind of transmissions use just a standard gear oil. Sometimes it's a multi-viscosity gear oil like a 7590, an 80W90, or in severe conditions or higher ambient temperatures, you can see 85 140s and things like that. Just a typical mineral type gear oil for those. One of the things that's limited on there is the amount of EP, or extreme pressure additives, in there because of the softer metals that you have on the bronze or brass bushings that are used to energize and de-energize those gears to change ratios. So that's another thing. Another aspect of the manual transmission is a clutch. And again, different than what I talked about with the automatic transmission. This clutch is manually, by the driver's left foot, energized and de-energized. And what that does is disconnects power from the engine to the transmission, allowing that transmission to freewheel, if you will. It's a term they use to allow easy interaction between the gears when they slide back and forth or mesh together. There's also a bearing in there called a throwout bearing that can go bad. There's all kinds of elements in there that get used quite a bit and then can lead to excessive wear when you're dealing with these kind of transmissions. So that's typically what you're going to see when you're dealing with a manual transmission. Now, as far as automated transmissions go, excuse me here a second. Automated transmissions, this is going to look similar to what you, or even this is an over-the-road truck here. The automated transmission, you can see the driver here typically has a keypad where the numbers show up on the keypad. They can select the starting gear that they want by they depress the clutch. This still has a clutch because remember, this is an automated transmission. What that means is it's a manual transmission that is shifted automatically. And a lot of people refer to them as manual automatic shifted transmissions. So the gearing and things like that are very similar. The difference is once the driver selects the gear ratio and releases the clutch, the computer takes over. And the driver does not need to manually shift a lever, select a range, do anything that once they've started at the beginning. As far as the clutch goes, they still will need to use that clutch when they stop and take off, similar to what they did before. But going down the road, they don't have to put the leg in, pull the leg back out, change the gear, do it again, repeat that over and over again. So we refer to the automatic shifting as done by the computer. The industry knows them as the ECU, or electronic control unit. Just like I talked about with the automatics, that can be programmed. That can be used to set your shift patterns. And another thing is with these transmissions is the computer can learn. Each driver's shift pattern can actually be learned by, or when the driving conditions, I should say, not necessarily the driver's input, but the shifting patterns can be learned and adjusted to road surface, incline, even weather. It can actually learn and adjust to make sure you get a smooth shift. You're in the right ratio. It's not shifting too soon. It's there when you need it. So that's basically how they differ from each other.
Right. No, for sure. And they can differ between OEMs, right? I've been in trucks where the automated manual, sometimes it's on the steering column. It has a little gear selector there. One of the OEMs, Volvo, has one down by the seat. The other ones have control panels, as you pointed out here. So definitely want to make sure you're working with your OEM and understanding how they operate, right? Because they can operate different depending on which manufacturer you're going with. Okay, so very interesting. Interesting that the automated still is like a manual at heart, right? We hear that a lot of times too. It's still a manual transmission. It's just kind of automated now. So like, why would I want to do this, right? What are the benefits? You've touched on a few here, but if you could dive into maybe how it's impacting the driver, efficiency, anything like that. What are the benefits switching from standard to automated manual?
Well, one of the things that we've heard from people, from fleet owners, larger fleet owners, is one of the things that has helped them quite a bit by switching to an automated type transmission is they still have the benefits of a manual transmission, but they're able to recruit more people or even a more diverse field of participants or the people to select from. Driver fatigue is definitely a benefit to using an automated transmission. The driver, again, can focus on safety by looking at the road, not worrying about what gear he has to select or she has to select. Do they have to push in the clutch every time they do it? Have they missed a gear? Is it going to go downhill? What ratio should I be in? This will automatically sense that. So it makes the driver's input, I won't say less important, but not as essential to the performance of the transmission and engine going down the road. Imagine going into, we've all been stuck in a traffic jam. Imagine if you're in a truck with a manual transmission and the truck traffic starts to move, then stops, then moves and stops. You're constantly on and off the clutch. That can wear a person out pretty quickly, especially if you've got older or challenged people that might have a difficulty pushing that clutch in. Now those people can drive these trucks without any issues. As long as they can do it once or twice, they should be good to go down the road. So, and I mentioned earlier about the shift patterns. One of the benefits to these is it is completely programmable. So the driver's input is, while he selects this ratio, the computer takes over and eliminates them from having to make those decisions, gives them a chance to focus on what they're doing. As far as fleet owners go, one of the things that we've seen or heard from is in order to increase, which we'll talk about fuel economy next, but in order to increase the fuel economy, a lot of fleet owners will recommend that their transmission speed limits be set at a hard limit, like 65 mile per hour, or depending on where they're going to be driving. But they can also, and I'm not endorsing speeding, but they can also program that so that if the driver selects cruise control, which is available on most vehicles these days, they might be able to get 2 more miles a gallon or whatever that's, or 2 more miles per hour. That's the word I'm looking for. 2 more miles per hour by using cruise control. Well, what's the benefit in that? Well, if you're using cruise control, you don't worry, the driver's not interacting. You're no more on and off the gas pedal to shift. It's all set and steady. You can improve a fuel economy doing that way. Another thing that we've talked about we've heard that when the driver's recruiting, a lot of the younger generation that's coming up now has not been exposed to manual transmissions like we have, well, I'm not saying that you're old, Jason, but I was exposed.
I know, clearly.
Maybe your great-grandfather was exposed to
I do have some gray going there.
My first car was a manual transmission. I won't tell you what it was because you'll laugh at me, but it was a manual transmission. So I learned on that. So the transition was not that big a deal for me, but a lot of my son just started driving recently. He's got his learner's permit. He would have no idea other than what he's seeing on Fast and the Furious, what a manual transmission is. Right. So more applicants, the younger applicants going into that industry, and because of the easiness of this, if you will, the training programs are a little less intense and a little less time consuming, which actually is a cost savings to the owners who are footing the bill for these CDLs and these trainings for these particular transmissions. Right. So recruiting is definitely one that we've talked about or that we've seen as an issue or as a definite benefit in that. But we all know what today's concern is, what the EPA has done to the engines as far as detuning them, dealing on emissions. That's something that is almost to the point where they can't do any more with it. So the only thing they can do now is to work on fuel economy. So we're seeing lighter viscosity fluids, which we'll talk about. We're seeing, again, limiting the driver's interaction can help increase fuel economy, again, on and off the pedal. More basic shift control, smoother shifts, less time pushing that throttle way down to get to do what you want to do. That can all be controlled electronically. So fuel economy is definitely a factor in that. Being able to control the timing, all of that leads to the shifting. One of the things that I read recently was the NACFE, which is the North American Council for Freight Efficiency. They claim that fleet owners, and this is a quote from them, fleet owners should expect to see an average of 1 to 3% improvement in fuel economy when switching to a automated, or what they call an automated manual shift or automated transmission. So I kind of did a little research on that and did a little number crunching on my own. So keep in mind that the number one expense or cost of an owner operator and or a fleet for over-the-road trucks is fuel. Price of fuel not really going down. It's up and down all the time. But let's think about this. Well, to us, a 1 to 3% gain in fuel economy may not sound like much. Let's figure this out. They say an owner-operator, on average, over-the-road truck spends around $50,000 to $70,000 annually on fuel. So if you take a 3%, now that's the maximum, I know, but if you take a 3% reduction in that, $50,000 to $70,000, you can add up to $1,500 to $2,100 annually. Now, I don't know about you, but $2,100 is a lot of money to me. And if I can save that just by by being able to drive a truck that does that, then can afford me that, then that's what I want to do. Okay, so that's an owner operator. What about a guy who owns, or a person who owns a fleet of, let's say, 200 trucks? Take that 3% and multiply it by 200 trucks, let's say. That's $300,000 to $420,000 in annual savings. It's starting to make sense. Why they're doing that. Every little bit helps as far as I'm concerned. Another thing that helps with fuel economy is, like I mentioned earlier, OEMs are starting to allow and even encourage the use of lighter viscosity fluids in their over-the-road transmissions, in their automated transmission. So anytime you use a lighter viscosity fluid, friction is reduced. If friction is reduced, then fuel economy can be gained. And again, there are several factors involved in what kind of percentage you can gain by that. It's all depending on the operator, how they operate. Everybody, two people don't drive alike. My son, I get in the car with him now. He's doing his learning phase. Luckily for me, he's just the opposite of I was. I wanted to go as fast as I could and get there, and I still do. He very observant of the speed limit. Very slow in his turns. I know that'll change. I know as he gets more comfortable, but right. you can just see the difference. I'm sure his fuel economy, when he starts driving full time for a while at least, will be a whole lot better than mine driving the same vehicle. So
right.
Right,
and I mean, to that point, even equate that to a new truck driver, or maybe, as you pointed out, a less experienced truck driver, as some of the younger drivers are coming up and might not have that experience. If they're like in a situation where they're merging onto the highway, right, you want them focused on merging onto the highway, not what gear they're in, where they're shifting, right? That is a huge distraction for an inexperienced driver. And as the driver pool shrinks, and that's just an added safety benefit. You mentioned the cruise control. A lot of today's safety systems are built on using the cruise control. You got predictive and adaptive cruise systems, right? And to your point, it all keeps it in that operational sweet spot, helping you kind of lower that bell curve. It does everything that a great driver can do, but great drivers are becoming few and far between and really, really valuable, right? So the equipment being able to help out. You mentioned some of the oils being able to move to a lower viscosity with some of these efficiency gains. How about the oils in the drain intervals? Will these transmissions impact those operations or maintenance points?
No, absolutely. With the demand from switching from manual to automated, again, they're manual transmissions. So as far as the actual working operations, there's not a huge difference mechanically or internally mechanically with the transmissions. However, because of the demand that they're getting, we're seeing the requirement of lighter fluids. So more robust fluids are definitely needed, but also lighter fluids. Transmission fluids that are more oxidative stable. In other words, when the transmission starts to get hot or it exceeds where it's supposed to be, the fluids are able to withstand those kind of temperatures and hold up. Whenever you can make your oil hold up, obviously should be able to extend your drain interval. Better robust additive package that are used out there. I mentioned the Ruston oxidation or the RNO package that you can see in there, as well as the gear protection that you're going to see for these automated transmissions. Shear stable base oils and polymers that might be used depending on what transmission fluid you select. Those all definitely play a big factor in improving your fuel economy. The OEMs are starting to allow drain intervals with the use of these lighter fluids or more robust fluids or better oxidative stable, or even synthetics. I don't know if we want us to go into the difference between the synthetic versus mineral, but we can definitely do that if you'd like. So, but we're starting to see fluid ranges, OEM recommendations for brand new vehicles off the road, off the assembly line, for 30,000 to even some rare lifetime fills. So extremely extended. But typical drain intervals on an over-the-road truck can be upwards of 60 to 75,000 miles. We're seeing on it. So that's pretty demanding, especially when you consider that you're using gears, you're just shifting them automatically, that you're doing the same thing, you're just doing it a little bit easier, but the fluid has to be able to withstand the demand that it's being out there. So one of the things that as a DA employee that we always insist on from the technical department, anybody there will tell you that whatever the OEM tells you your drain interval is, that's what it should be. Now, once your warranty period is over and you're using a comprehensive oil analysis program, which we do provide, then we can look at the results on that and determine whether or not you're pushing that truck as far as it will go, or if maybe we can extend that drain interval just a little bit. And we've had really good success with that program. So in a lot of cases, if the driver's typically doing what they're supposed to be doing and they're using the correct fluid, we can oftentimes with our fluids extend those drain intervals a little bit, and a little bit helps. So
right. No, and I do just want to stress this because I was talking with a engine OEM not too long ago about this very same thing, is that really working with your OEM to set that interval, as you point out, especially if you're under warranty, right? They will set the letter of the law for that. You want to make sure you're hitting those drain intervals. A lot of them will require used oil analysis within some parameters, right? It might be a couple tests before they can kind of, with confidence, extend that out, but definitely having their blessing and checking all those boxes to make sure. The last thing you want is an engine issue, especially outside of warranty. So even if it's a brand new truck or a new to you truck you got on the pre-owned lot, definitely want to leverage your professionals and friends in the industry to make sure that is getting done correctly. Now, you touched on a little bit of difference there between the synthetics and the more traditional oils. I know there's also been a lot of changes in the oil world in heavy duty over the past couple of years. Can you kind of maybe walk me through an overview of just the difference in oils that are being used and when to use them?
Sure, absolutely. One thing I will say before we move on to that subject, when we're talking about drain intervals, even with that comprehensive oil analysis program, we will never, and I speak for all of us at DA Lubricant, none of us will ever try to extend your drain interval at the expense of the iron or at the cost for the expense of any of the pieces of equipment or the machinery. It's just not worth it. Even though you're trying to save a buck on oil, and oil's not necessarily the cheapest thing in the world, it's still a whole lot cheaper, like you mentioned, than it is replacing hardware. So for sure. Just because you can do something doesn't mean it's necessarily the right thing to do. So always follow the OEM guidelines, and if you are using a program, talk to us, let us help you with that, look at the results of samples and determine whether or not it's a good idea to extend that drain.
Yeah, so much of it is really determined on application. Even if you have a kind of baseline automated spec that you feel like you have a pretty predictable operation on how it's being operated, so much of it is what you're hauling and where you're hauling. And that is really just specific to that.
Yeah, just like I said with my son and I mean, two different driving styles completely. My wife and I drive very similar. And I don't know if that's a good thing, but we do. But he drives very cautiously. And miles per gallon, hardware, suspension, all of that can take a beating, and it all depends on what you're doing. So, yeah, just do what the OEM tells you. Talk to your professionals. Use the required product. Use the training. Use a analysis program, and ask the experts. That's what we're there for.
For sure.
Now, you were asking about the different types of products. Let me just briefly touch on the difference between synthetic and automatics, or synthetics and mineral-based products before we move on to that, just to clear up any doubts on there. I hear people all the time talking about, well, we can go to a synthetic because it's a better fluid, but once you do that, you're stuck. You can't go back to a mineral base. That's absolutely not true. The base oils are completely interchangeable, completely compatible. There are some advantages and different disadvantages to both. With synthetic lubricants, you get either a highly refined base oil or a man-made. There's two different categories that you can be dealing with when you're dealing with, quote, synthetic base oils. And a lot of OEMs will do a synthetic blend, which we'll talk about in a minute, that it's very possible to have that. But synthetics bring two things to the table. They bring better oxidation stability. In other words, if you're running that transmission above and beyond the limit, or you just happen to be in a situation where you're going uphill all day long, then you're pushing those temperatures up a little bit. The synthetics can help that oxidation stability and keep that oil in grade and keep it from wearing out prematurely. The other thing, because of the molecule structure of a synthetic base oil, they're very similar. They're allowed to flow a little bit easier. So at startup, getting that oil up to the top of that engine or the top of that transmission or where it needs to be can be done in a little bit a faster fashion by using a synthetic base oil. The negative thing about a synthetic base oil is its cost. There is a price increase to doing that. It's up to the operator to decide, or the owner to decide, is the cost of that worth it? In a normal application, it may not be necessary. We can get the life expectancy we can, knowing your driver, knowing your fleet, knowing the OEM recommendations. You can probably get by with a really good quality mineral-based product. Mineral-based products have really natural lubricating properties. When I say mineral, I'm talking about a conventional type technology where the oil is refined, comes out of the ground, it's refined, and then it's blended into a finished lubricant. By not hydro cracking those things extensively to get to what we refer to as a Group 3 or considered a synthetic mineral-based oil, you don't lose some of the natural lubricating properties that are in there. Other advantages to a mineral-based product is the ability to solubilize or mix with the additives that are going there and keep those oils suspended. The higher you refine, or if you get into a man-made product, you lose a lot of that solubility. In other words, the additives don't want to stay in suspension. So what they have to do is they have to add products like esters, which are great, very stable products, but that adds to the cost of the product. So it's a balancing act. What do I need? Am I worried? If I'm worried, then maybe I'd better go to a synthetic, et cetera. Does that make sense?
Yes, right, exactly. And I think what it highlights, especially for me, is oil formulation is complicated, right? Like you can have an idea of what these things kind of do, which you outlined here, but even you start to talk about how the additive packages interact with each other, what that can mean for your engine, right? So again, going back to it, being able to talk to someone who knows what they're doing, understands the application and what product you put in there, right? Don't try to go it alone and just make a choice based on what you might assume, right? That can get you into some trouble. So I think, the good overview there, and then back to it, what's your application and what's it demand, right?
Sure. Yeah, and it's all going to be different.
Right.
Other thing I think you were asking before I started off on the synthetics was the difference between oils as far as what the manufacturers advertise them as. In particular, approved meats or recommended.
Right.
Those are, yeah, those are out there. When you do what?
Oh, I was just gonna say, yeah, that the basics of it, but it is complicated. There are definitely different layers here. So yeah, walk me through that, because different OEMs are even factory filling with different oils that you have to pay attention to at this point.
Right, absolutely. Every time you buy the vehicle, whether you have to purchase it separate or it comes to the passenger car, whatever, a truck, whatever, it's going to come with an operator's manual. And that manual will give you the things we talked about, like drain intervals, what fluids they recommend, what fluids are that are approved, et cetera. Those are some terms that are going to be used in there. So what do those mean exactly? Well, the term approved just simply means that the fluid manufacturer has taken the formulation or the specifications that the OEM has provided, blended a formula to meet those specifications, and submitted that formula to the OEM for testing. Now, the OEM will test that product, and if it meets the specification, they can give it a stamp of approval on it. What that means is the manufacturer can put the word approved, General Motors approved, Allison, whoever the OEM, Ford, Chrysler, whoever it is, they can put that on their data sheet and even on their label of their product that shows it's an approved product. The bad thing about that, or not necessarily a bad thing, but there is a pretty dramatic cost associated with doing that. So a lot of manufacturers have shied away, oil manufacturers have shied away from the approved except where needed, and gone with what's meets or meets the performance requirements of things like that they put on there. What that typically means is they've skipped one step, and that step is presenting that product to the OEM to get their stamp on it. In doing that, they may have saved quite a bit of money. I mean, there are thousands and thousands of dollars that can be tied up in getting a license or an approved product for a piece of equipment. Some of the misunderstandings or the misinterpretation is that it's not as good. That's not the case. The case is that they hadn't spent the money on that to do that, but they have a formula that they'll stand by. If any manufacturer of oil out there that's worth their weight in salt is going to stand behind their products if it's used correctly and in the right application. Again, that's what we said. We won't do anything outside of anything that will cause damage to the hardware or by drain intervals, by giving you the wrong fluid or anything like that. So approved products, great. They're on the list. A lot of OEMs will actually publish those on their website. So if you're concerned and you want for your vehicle an approved product, you can actually go to their website and see whether or not that product has gone through those testing. Again, meets the performance requirements of it a lot of people use, doesn't mean that product's not as good, maybe even better. It just means it hasn't gone through the OEM to get that stamp on it. It still has to meet those qualifications or those specifications that the OEM lays out in order to be used in those. And again, the company will stand behind that, just like DA does with their products. One of the things that I'll mention about that is one of the ways you can tell, and we get this a lot, was people will say, well, this product here is X amount of dollars, yours is X amount. That's a little bit cheaper. Why is yours cheaper? Cheaper is not as good. Well, it may be a very similar formulation, but we didn't pay for those fees that obviously the customer will have to absorb. So anytime you pay for a licensing fee, it's not a freebie. Somebody's going to have to pay for that, and usually it's the end user. So that's it as far as approved and meets. Did I explain that good enough?
No, yeah, for sure. It makes sense. And, just to kind of recap here a little bit before I've got one more question for you, then we'll get into the Q&A. By the way, we've got a number of questions here. What's that?
I'm not done with this section yet, but go ahead.
I know, I'm just reminding people they need to ask questions. We've got a lot of questions to go through. We are saving up time to go through those. We've got a good number here, but please ask your question now so we can get to it. People are tired of hearing me ask questions. We want to get to your questions for sure. One quick thing. I know we started off talking about transmissions, and you might wonder, like, well, how do we get the oils right? The way these powertrains are integrated so much these days, the transmission, the one you spec there, is going to impact how the engine is operating, which is going to impact which oils you're speccing and using, and your lubrication choices there. We've talked a lot of great info in general terms, but can you give me some examples, maybe using the DA products, of like what I will see, right? What products do you have, and what are they used for, and what are those examples of some of the things we've talked about here in the webinar?
Sure. Just finishing up what we talked about as far as meets and approved is we also hear the term recommended. If you look in your owner's manual, your operator's manual, you may see an OEM say, we recommend XYZ or this product. They typically do that with their approved products, and that's fine. But by law, they can't insist that you use that recommended product. The Magnuson-Moss Act prevents them to do that. What the OEM has to do is say, we recommend this product, but they provide the specifications to meet those specifications of the requirement to the general population. So the OEM or oil manufacturers such as DA Lubricant can take those specifications and formulate a product to meet those specifications and can be used under warranty periods for those. They can't limit to use in saying monopolize one company or one oil supplier just because it's in their manual. Their manual says recommended. It doesn't mean it has to be. So I just wanted to clear that up before we went on, because I get calls all the time. Well, I didn't see that particular product on the approval list. That's right. We guarantee you it's going to work in that application. It meets all the specifications for that application, and it can be used by law in that under the warranty period. And we stand behind it, even if the OEMs were to balk somehow. DA will stand behind those products.
I see. Okay, very good.
Yeah, moving on. You ask what products DA offers. The next slide, I think, will bring that up. The first one we're going to deal with is typically for manual transmissions. I'll do it. I ain't scared. There it is. The first product that DA offers for their manual transmissions, or it can actually be used in the automated transmissions as well, as long as the OEM allows a mineral-based product. This is a product called Torgard 50, SAE 50. It is a transmission fluid, as you can see on there. It can also it's also considered a TO4 product, which we're not going to get into here, but that is a Caterpillar spec to be used in automated transmissions for off-highway. But our focus is on highway. So we do sell this product quite a bit to over the road. It is slowly giving way to the synthetic products that we're going to talk about next. But it's a ISO or SAE 50 weight. It's a mineral-based product. Offers great rust and oxidation control. One of the nice things about the Torgard product is it does contain an extra R&O additive in there, so it can operate even under with moisture or contamination of water. It definitely will perform in those kind of conditions as well. High detergency levels to carry any type of debris and or what we call internally generated debris, where you get a little bit of wear coming off the gears or a little bit of flaking here and there. It'll suspend and carry that away with the detergent dispersant package to the filtration system to keep that out of the mesh of the gears. So That's our manual. That's our product for that. What the industry is going to, like we mentioned with synthetics, is a synthetic version of exactly what we just talked about. And that is our Accenture 2 SAE 50. It is a synthetic-based 50-weight gear oil. We talked earlier about synthetics and what they bring to the table, superior oxidation control. So if the transmission starts to run hotter or whatever, the synthetics will give you a little bit better control, help you sleep a little bit better at night, knowing that, yeah, I over-revved that thing a few times. It's okay. You're protected by a quality product. The nice thing about synthetics as well, because of the oxidation stability, is the ability to extend the drain intervals. So if we extend the drain interval, that's great. It saves you money on fluid. But think about this: if you can eliminate one oil change a year by extending your drain interval by using a quality product, not only are you saving the cost of the fluid that you would use, you're also the labor that takes to change the oil, to change the filter, the downtime of the truck, the idle time of the driver or the operator. So there's some big savings that can be made just by using a synthetic product when the OEM recommends that product in there.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me. Better cold flow at startup with the synthetic base oil. It's going to get to where it needs to be. So when you take off, jump in there in the morning instead of letting things warm up like a lot of us do, you'll add that little bit of extra protection there by using a synthetic. Because of the slippery nature, the similar molecules or the identical molecules in a synthetic base oil, it's very slippery. Slippery means less friction. Less friction means better fuel economy. So that's where we're at, trying to extend drain intervals. We have two products to offer. We've got our Sensure 2, which is our 50 weight synthetic oil, and we also have our Torguard 50 weight, which is our mineral-based transmission fluid.
All right. Very good. A lot of great info there. I really appreciate you taking the time, Jim. This was great. Gave me a lot to think about as well. Okay, so we've got a good rundown of questions here. Please keep sending your questions. We still have a bit of time here. We got about 10-15 minutes to go through these questions and get you on with your day. Before we go to the Q&A, I'd like to ask everyone to please take a moment to fill out our survey. The survey should be popping up on your screen here in a minute. And if it doesn't launch, you can always click the survey icon down at the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. Okay, that bit of housekeeping out of the way, we are going to get to the questions. Let me just peruse these here and see what our first one is. Okay, so we have a question here about additive packages, and I think you touched on this here when you were talking about your products, but just want to clarify. The question is the additive package the same for manual transmissions compared to automated manual?
Very, very similar. Again, like we talked about earlier, the difference between an automated transmission and a manual transmission is strictly driver interaction. The gears are the same, very, very similar. So the additive package is very similar. The only difference would be in the base oil. So the additives are very, very similar. Yes. Good question.
Okay, excellent. And you already answered the next question, because the next question was, how many gears does the automated manual have versus a manual? And you just said it here, same amount of gears, same thing, right?
Yeah, they're primarily the same. You know, there's different OEMs make different ratios, different numbers of gear ratios. So it just depends on the OEM. But no, that hasn't been affected.
Okay, very good. Another question came in talking about the viscosities. Do lower viscosity manual transmission oils increase fuel economy significantly?
We talked about that a little bit as far as the study that I read about, where it was 1 to 3% by using an automated transmission. Again, that question as far as how much can I gain by doing that? There's so many factors involved in that. Whether it's a synthetic, whether it's a mineral, whether you're driving a rock truck as opposed to a U-Haul truck, all of that can make a big difference in that. So fuel economy is definitely on an individual basis. The driver input can definitely, how heavy is that right foot? That's going to make a big difference on the amount of fuel savings as well. But they predict with an automatic transmission under normal operating conditions, a 1 to 3% increase in fuel economy.
Very good. Have a couple of questions here referring directly to the DA product. I want to make sure we clarify. Sensure 2 is SAE 50. That's for manual transmissions?
For automated transmissions, and it can also be used in a manual, provided that they want a 50 weight in there. Some of the older manuals will still use a typical multi-grade, like a 7590 or 85 140 gear oil, similar to what you'd use in a differential. It just depends on the OEM and what they're asking for. But yes, the 50 weight can be used in a manual as long as the OEM recommends it, or automated.
Okay, very good. Still have a number of questions coming in here. Keep them coming as I'm working through here. Kind of a fun, forward-looking one here. How do you see equipment design changing oil formulation going forward, say over the next 10 years?
Based on what we're seeing right now, as far as transmission goes, for passenger car, we're seeing a whole different gamut of different kind of configurations coming out with the CVT transmissions, the constant velocity transmission. I don't think that we're at that point now for over the road. I don't think the technology is there for that. But what I do see changing, and it is changing, is definitely lighter viscosity fluids for not only engine oils and transmission fluids, but just all the way around. The whole focus these days is on fuel economy, fuel savings, getting the most out of it that you possibly can. And the easiest way to do that is with lighter viscosity fluids. One of the things you have to keep in mind is going to a lighter viscosity fluid, you cannot give up durability, which we're going to talk about in other podcasts when we get into engine oils and stuff, that we're going to be talking about durability as a primary concern. So the additive package, while we're lowering the base oil, the additive package has to be more robust. So I can continue to see that as a trend: lighter viscosity, lighter viscosity, lighter viscosity. That's going to probably be the trend.
Okay, very good. I got an interesting question here. I think that speaks to a lot of fleets' concerns in trying to boil down some of the complexity here. It says, with using the DA product, for example, what would you recommend for mixed fleets, right? Fleets that have numerous OEM nameplates, automatic transmissions, automated transmissions, maybe some manual transmissions. Is there a silver bullet product for a mixed fleet with older and newer trucks, or do we really have to go down into the details there?
You're talking to a technical manager, so I have to put my technical manager hat on. I mean, I have to move it sideways every now and then to answer some of those questions the way they want to hear it. But the correct answer is no. What you're going to put in an automatic transmission is not the same as you're going to put in a manual transmission. It's not the same as you're going to put in an automated transmission, unless the OEM allows you to do that. And it all depends on the manufacturer and how that piece of equipment is built and what the capabilities are. A lot of them will give you a variety, and usually the variety is based on ambient temperature. In other words, you need this product, but will allow this grade to be used, provided you're in this ambient temperature. Or a lot of them will, even in their manuals, show you like drain intervals and viscosities to use based on severity of use.
Right.
They'll have normal, severe, and they'll give you different specs for those. So no, there is no silver bullet. As much as a lot of sales guys would like to think they could walk in with one product and sell that to their customers, I deal with it. It's not possible. I mean,
right.
Yes, you can consolidate in some areas, but it's like I always compare it to like a Swiss Army knife. They're great tools for everything, but they're not really designed specifically for one particular use, like a crescent wrench. Don't use it. It's not designed for that. So.
Right. Yeah, I've tried hammering a nail in with a crescent wrench before. It does not work so well. And that's, I think that's the tale of a lot of the fleet spec, right? There's no one spec to rule them all, but there is one Jim that you can call, and he will answer all of your various questions, just like he puts up with mine. So again, lean on your. Lean on your professionals here. Got a couple more minutes here for a couple questions. Real quick, if we don't get to your question, don't worry. Jim has all the questions, and he and his team can follow up here after the webinar if we don't get to them. But we're going to try to get to as many as we can right now. Okay, some rapid fire ones here. Why do some transmissions require EP and others do not?
That's an excellent question. I kind of touched on that earlier a little bit when I talked about the bronze and brass, or what we refer to as softer metals that might be incorporated into that piece of equipment. The EP additive is typically sulfur phosphorus, having trouble talking now, is kind of rough on softer metals. It has a tendency to eat away at the bronze and the brass, and even some aluminums. It can actually be detrimental to those. When you've got a transmission like a manual transmission where you've got a bronze bushing, but you also have gears that have to be meshed together, you might need what we refer to as a mild EP. And there's different GL ratings from 1 to whatever, distinguishing how much sulfur phosphorus EP additive is in there or how much EP protection you get. So yeah, the softer metals are definitely what plays a factor in that. The gears want them, the bushings don't. So you've got to compromise and come up with a solution. Mild EPs.
All right. Okay, very cool. Okay, I think we have time for just one more question. Maybe we can squeeze in here. Are telematics a driver of switching to automatics or automated transmissions, in your opinion?
Are telematics? I don't have that much experience with the telematics, to be honest with you. My understanding is they are very similar. The difference is the way that they are programmed and or shifting is selected. Again, the OEMs will be able to tell you more about what fluid requirements is needed for those applications. And we probably have a product. We probably have a product, but we need to know what the OEM specifications are for it.
Right, for sure. And if I can touch it, because I'm a telematics nerd, so I was excited. I'll touch this one too. Right. I think with some of those, the connectivity there, I think the power is more in being able. You mentioned time and cruise, right? Being sure you can set in cruise, and they'll even offer a couple miles per hour higher than the governor would allow, right? The telematics and connectivity with the intelligent. Automated manuals, it'll allow the fleet manager to see how much time that vehicle is spending in cruise, right? So your telematics dashboard will be able to tell you, okay, these drivers in these trucks are actually spending time in cruise, and these are not, right? They'll tell you which ones aren't, and that is a super, super easy way to get into telematics and improve your operational fuel efficiency, just to be able to see, all right, who's using that cruise control and who's not.
How long they're using it, yeah, absolutely.
For sure. It helps, as you point out, just lower that bell curve of the cost, right? And make sure everybody's kind of flattening some costs there and bringing some predictability.
And another thing that when talking about the programming that they deal with, not just the cruise control, but they can also gain maybe a few RPMs or a few miles per hour by encouraging the operator to be in top gear instead of driving one gear down, which can cause the RPMs to go up, less fuel economy. If they can gain 2 miles an hour by allowing them to shift into the high gear, then gain that 2 miles an hour, there's a fuel savings there too. So there's all kinds of tricks or ways they can encourage the operator to use cruise control, use the correct gear for the right thing, as well as the transmission taking over and doing it itself.
Right, no, for sure, because that's a good point. You can still, it's still a manual at heart, right? You still can change the gears, usually through a button press or however the manufacturer sets it up, that the gears still can be changed even in those modes.
Yep, absolutely. Driver still has some input.
No, yeah, for sure, for sure. Okay, I think we're out of time. I know we had some questions that we couldn't get to. We're sorry. We will follow up. We'll get Jim all those questions for him and his team to follow up with. Jim, thank you for taking the time. Really appreciate it. Had a lot of fun. Learned a lot.
Well, thanks for having us. We really appreciate you.
And everyone, one more reminder that, again, we talked about a lot here and we went through a lot of detail, right? You will be getting an email to watch an on-demand version in a day or so. Log back in, watch it, go over any information that you may have missed or want a refresher on. You can also email it over to friends for them to reference as well. And that's it. That's all we got. We really appreciate you taking the time to watch. Jim, thanks for taking your time, and everyone have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you very much.